CDG BizCast. I'm your host, Christian Gonzalez, co-owner of Creativity Design Group, a digital marketing firm in Houston, Texas. Today, we will be speaking to the inventor of the world's first ever app store, and he presented the idea to Steve Jobs personally back in 1993. His career eventually led him to the world of entrepreneurship, to which he founded TruAnon, a powerful tool used to fight profile fraud on social media. Please welcome Jesse Tayler. Welcome to BizCast, Jesse. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you, Christian, and it's nice to be with you and your audience.
It is truly an honor to have you as a guest on BizCast today. Please introduce yourself a little more, and please tell us more about TruAnon and why you decided to form such a formidable company focused on destroying profile fraud.
Right. Well, like many of your listeners, I found myself to be an entrepreneur. Some call it a vocation, others call it a disease. I can go with either definition, but I got an early start in my career, and that gave me kind of the latitude to pick and choose, honestly, what I thought was cool. Sometimes I was right. Sometimes, it didn't work out. I recall a Ken Burns documentary on baseball, something I don't particularly know a lot about, and maybe some of your audience do or don't. But there was one very enthusiastic gentleman describing why he loved baseball. He said, "We revere the greats in baseball. This is, they are the people who are able to step up to that plate and fail 7 out of every 10 times. These are the greats in baseball." And I thought, hey, as an entrepreneur, I think maybe I kind of like baseball.
Yes, I agree. Baseball players are extremely resilient people, and they don't allow the fear of failure to stop them in their success in their career. And, coming out of Houston, we've seen it in action here with the Astros. They won the World Series 2 times. But in terms of TruAnon, what was the problem that you were noticing out in the world that led you to form this tool that helps ensure that there aren't people out there impersonating others? You noticed that there was a rampant problem, but how did you notice it? And what approach did you take to stop profile fraud with TruAnon?
Well, that's an interesting question because, of course, every startup entrepreneur has to know their origin story. And people ask this. And to be quite honest, I'm not entirely sure. Where did the idea start? Well, in the 2000s or so, I ran a platform of social networking. Now, of course, we wanted to be Facebook, but we settled as a very nice service business that, now is a common business of a social networking platform. And frankly, I met my wife 25 years ago on a section of Craigslist that has been since censored by our government for human trafficking, rape, extortion, murder. And I realized something was bothering me in the back of my head that had to do with all of these things. What was it? But what politics? What began as a business, for instance, if you're a big influencer on Instagram, to get more followers, you take some of your income, right? You got $1 million budget. Take some of that to get more followers, right? To outpace your competitors in growth. Well, where is that money best spent? Now, some of these providers are legit, right? They're just doing their marketing job. Others, maybe they have a click farm somewhere, but others still are generating profiles. And you say to yourself, well, maybe these are fake profiles, but they're like my listeners, right? They draw more people to buy my music, whatever it is that I'm doing. And you think, well, that's not a bad business. But then you take this problem to the reality of our everyday lives. These political propaganda isn't just amplifying a famous person's words, it's reiterating them through masquerading fake profiles that pretend to be people that live nearby, my neighbors. They share my life values and interests, right? I'm a mother in public school here in New York City, and I just was looking at this formerly bizarrely fringe political position. And gee, this bit of evidence seems to make me suddenly think maybe there's something there, right? These things are insidious. So where Where did it start? I'm not quite sure. But at some point, I realized that these fake profiles have grown up from pickpocket crimes to crimes that are quite serious: rape, extortion, and murder. But now our global democracies are being rocked by fake profiles. I have 4 children. In the future world that we hope to secure, our privacy and genuine selves online has to be solved. So I don't know where the idea came from, but in fact, my lack of knowledge about trust and safety and identity, and the fact that this probably just brewed as a problem, led me to different conclusions and ultimately to an invention that is different than what other verified solutions do. Instead of requiring people to surrender some private documents for others to review, some authority, why not take the living digital footprints that I already have? I'm talking about links and profiles that we already use for other people to know us by, right? That we show our expertise. My blog, my LinkedIn profile. I'm a software engineer. My GitHub profile provides 15 years of collaboration with other human beings who expect me, the person they know, to be the person that's checking code in and out of their repositories and so forth. That digital property is part of my living digital footprints. It's a public property, but if I confirm that I own it, I can show this off and people can believe that I'm me. Furthermore, software could tabulate the depth of these interconnections and reflect a rank and score that sums up the totality of all of these links and profiles that I confirm and connect together. And when I do that, this score brings me up to a credible level of identity, which is just the same as showing a piece of private document like a driver's license. And I can boost confidence well beyond that. And I didn't have to surrender anything private. I didn't have to lose any privacy or risk that. But I will take issue with one phrase that I heard you use, something to the effect of that we prevent profile fraud. What we're really doing is making profile fraud obsolete. What we've done is created a verify that benefits people who use it. And this unlocks revenue because it multiplies the lifetime value of accounts on services that we use. That's why they want you to verify, right? But when there's no private docs to review or no disputes to resolve, unlimited people can verify all at once. And when I do, I engage more of my audience, right? More audience, more visibility is always good when you're credible. But it's always bad when your intent is fraudulent. If you have fraudulently created or hijacked and stolen these properties, the last thing you want to do is publicly confirm that you've done so and are using TruAnon to confirm these properties. But of course, with every property you present, the followers, the audience, the collaborators, right? These people are going to notice. And so for a fraudster, every piece of property they put up adds way more risk than it does build confidence. And so in this way, a verify that's benefiting people that are credible is absolutely the opposite to people that have fraudulent intent. And so if I come across your profile and you haven't verified, and I know there are links and profiles that you use to showcase your digital identity, I can see you're avoiding this confirmation. Well, I just don't trust you, right? Avoiding that kind of confirmation is just as clear as having it. You could keep yourself so private that all you display is something that says, I'm Jesse, I live in New York, my age range is, 45 to 55, and my rank is genuine, and I have a score of 4.1 that says, 4.1 out of 5 that says, I'm probably the person I said. That's all I wanted to do on those Craigslist posts. But I wanted it to do it in a way that even Craigslist didn't have access to my identity, right? I wanted a one-way connection, a zero knowledge proof. And so I thought about this problem probably for several years before I began to think that I understood a way to solve it. And ultimately, it is extremely simple. right? Instead of confirming you on something private, you confirm public stuff. And all TruAnon is doing is reflecting the amount of public accountability that you've presented. So we're unbiased, right? We're not giving you anything you didn't already have. So that's kind of how it came to be. And as to why I built it, fake profiles are driving us all insane, aren't they? So I just wondered about it more than some people did.
Yes, I've noticed that to be quite a problem as well. A very common topic on BizCast here are scams and fraud prevention. And I've talked to many people in the past who have told me that they have spoken to scammers pretending to be certain celebrities. And sometimes they've talked to scammers who pretend to be certain politicians. And I see exactly what you're talking about. And I do believe that TruAnon truly is the solution that the world needs right now, because there's just too many fakers out there. There's too many liars, too many identity thieves. Identity theft is no joke, and when you become a victim of it, it really hurts in the long run. So all I can say is that I am more than thankful to know that you have provided the world a product that is making the world a better place every day. Now I would like to go all the way back to 1993. Please tell us about the world's first ever app store, the app wrapper, why you invented it and attempted to sell the idea to Steve Jobs back in 1993. What were the benefits of distributing software online versus purchasing physical copies on discs?
Oh, wow. That is a very interesting question, or perhaps a complicated question for which the answer is very interesting. The reason we invented it is because Steve Jobs' next computer, where the World Wide Web was also invented at the very same time, did not come with a floppy disk drive. So there was no inexpensive medium to transfer software. This was very much a network computer. And Steve Jobs, being a very forward-looking person, believed that floppy disks had seen their day, that they did not transfer enough data, that they were outdated and obsolete, and that, a magneto-optical disk that holds, a whopping 256 megabytes, which at the time really was jaw-dropping. But unfortunately, that medium cost $50 for a developer, $100 for a consumer. And if you added your software's margin on top of that in those days, there was nothing you could sell that was cheap. In fact, getting software to people was just a very difficult task. It was mostly done through CD-ROMs, and getting that done on these computers was also a difficult thing. So it was somewhat pragmatic. Our company, Paget Press, was in the business of helping indie and small developers bring their products to market. And one day we really said to ourselves, the biggest problem with helping people bring products to market is the box. How many can you print? How do you make it? How do you assemble even a box, right? This is something you have to manufacture. How do you send it? Where do you send it? How many? These were all incredibly expensive things that today are hard to imagine. So, okay, why did people drive to a store called Egghead just to buy a floppy disk to take it home to install it themselves? Well, let's think about this for a minute. Software was always digital, right? You could always transfer it digitally, right? That was always there. In fact, PCs, with their inability to talk on the larger network, were really the islands of computing, right? But still, we copy files. That's what computers do. So part of the problem was distributing software in a way that you controlled who owned it. And part of the problem was just telling people software was worth something, right? When IBM sold their hardware, you bought the computer, and the software was all open source, right? Nobody valued that. Bill Gates had just come along and was really teaching the world about the value of putting software in a box. Windows 3.1 had just shipped. This was dominating WordPerfect and Lotus 1-2-3 in favor of Word and Excel. The control over the operating system and all of the system software had begun, and Microsoft was making tons of money. So today, we look back and we say, well, the old way is prone to fraud, right? It's shrinkage and boxes are ruined. People could just take one floppy disk, install it, and hand it over to their workmate, and then they can install it, right? There was no protection on the software. It just came in a box, right? What you were buying was the book. So we look back on this today and we think, wow, what if you had a bug in your 1.0, right? You got a 1.1 to get out. Now you've printed up all these boxes. You just mailed them to China. And now you find out there's a bug in your software. What do you even do? And so this was an invention that today seems quite obvious. You can do all kinds of things with app stores. And I don't think you can buy software in a box anymore. Maybe for a video game? Nah. I can't think of any situation where you can buy software in a box because it's just too expensive, right? And this is very interesting because this is really translating. We took something that was software already. We made it physical so you could buy it and bring it home and install it where, again, it was software. What the App Store did was make this instantaneous. And when you think about it, think of Napster in the 2000s, right? Music piracy was out of control, rampant. And along comes iTunes, an app store, and it changed all of that. Not by making music piracy impossible, right? You could still make digital copies of music, limitlessly without detection. It just made it obsolete, right? People get better quality experience for less time, effort / money. It's just that simple. And so today, we don't really see that fraud. And what the App Store really was doing was transitioning from the physical world to a purely digital solution. And this is the exact same thing we were just talking about with TruAnon, right? When you take physical ID to the bar or bank, there's no problem with it. You take that same ID online, just like music. It's suddenly in the online universe. It's subject to different laws of physics. You can make copies of that data, forever. So only a purely digital solution works in the digital world. And we saw that with the App Store over the last 20 years. And I think we're going to see the exact same transition from physical identity to a purely digital identity, which we can own, control, and keep over our whole lives. And I think in 5 or 10 years, we'll look back at the idea of trying to show a picture of your driver's license. Your driver's license was created from an account in a computer, right? But the reason that data was used to print your driver's license was so that you could use it when you didn't have access to data, right? So if we want to solve the problem of privacy and answering private questions on the internet, a place where copies of information can be made without limit or detection, then the only way we're going to keep ourselves safe, the only way we're going to make that identity separate from the services that we use, whether or not we trust them or not, Elon Musk can come by and buy your favorite company and turn it into something you hate. Separating our identity from these accounts gives us control over our privacy. And one last thing about the App Store and how that all kind of came to be. Imagine trying to be an entrepreneur pitching the App Store to regular people. The reaction is universally, look, you're flying in the face of enormous success. Microsoft is absolutely mopping the floor of technology companies precisely by doing the opposite of what you're thinking. So they didn't even really get to evaluate the idea. They just summarily rejected it. And I point this out for those in your audience who are entrepreneurs, because however obvious it might seem that they were laughable from today's perspective, they were completely normal, given the reality that they saw. Answer the last part of your question. What's a startup company in Seattle doing pitching the App Store to Steve Jobs? Well, this was not the ambition of our startup. We wanted to be the App Store for everybody, right? Steve Jobs' demo is dangerous. The guy had a reputation for being unfriendly to the point that you demo to him and leave crying. Getting his attention is not easy. Getting in the room. All of these things. So why are you doing it? This is the last Hail Mary pass at the end of the startup runway, right? When you've been building something very expensive for 3 or 4 years and your investors are asking, oh, where's the money? Sales are not that great, right? We're barely hanging in there. And when you show it to people, they don't like it. So, 2 interesting parts about this story. One is it kind of reminds us of baseball, where you step up to the plate only to fail 7 out of every 10 times. And if you do step up to the plate and get that kind of average, you're doing really well. So, I didn't expect much to come of it. It was a frustration. Steve wasn't looking at what we were doing, and he should see it. Now, why are we showing it to him? Because, we had no choice. Steve is a person who sees the world differently. He's unencumbered by reality. So for him, perhaps envisioning a future without floppy disks and without Microsoft was easy. But nobody else that we pitched this to, including other software developers, except the very small ones and a few very forward-looking ones. But I just remind your audience that however obvious this solution may seem to you today, why wouldn't you want to, buy a book on your phone and read it immediately, right? It's just obvious. But at the time that we were putting this stuff together, people didn't believe in it, and it was really a tough thing to sell.
Yes, I can see that's quite an incredible story about App Wrapper. It truly was an innovation ahead of its time, I would say, and definitely a major game changer in the software world. Now, about Steve Jobs, you talked about how he was unfriendly, and I read that he was known for having temper tantrums and screaming at his employees over the smallest of details. And technically, the way you described him, and based on all the stuff that I've read about him, he's basically the Gordon Ramsay of the technology world. He was just so mean to people. He had really high standards for everybody, and I know he was all about innovation, but at the same time, I found his behavior to be quite unprofessional and quite toxic most of the time, because there are professional methods of giving feedback to your subordinates, and screaming at them and throwing temper tantrums and just being downright rude to their faces is not really the answer. And that's coming from me, a very tell-it-like-it-is blunt person who has no problem speaking his mind. But I just felt that Steve Jobs kind of pushed the envelope on that a little too far, and he truly does sound like a rather toxic yet innovative individual. But that's besides the point, though. App Wrapper, in my opinion, sounds like it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, because digital rights management is a big thing, especially if you're a software developer. You don't want other people pirating your software or stealing your ideas. And software piracy has become such a problem over the years that it led Adobe back in 2013 to convert their Creative Suite family of products into a cloud-based scenario. Adobe saw that many people were pirating many of the products within the Creative Suite family, that they just went ahead and converted them all to a subscription-based model, which we now know today as the Creative Cloud. Adobe specifically did this to fight piracy and to lower software costs to the consumer. This pretty much made a domino effect where other companies such as Microsoft and Autodesk and Corel all decided they wanted to go subscription model as well. Microsoft Office became a subscription-based product. It was a major breakthrough in the software industry that when one major player decided to start doing it, others followed suit. And in the end, it did prevent piracy to a certain extent. I have heard that people are still pirating cloud-based products of Adobe, and I do know that at one point, Photoshop was the #1 most pirated program in the world, even after Creative Cloud launched. But I would say that going cloud-based certainly plays a role in helping prevent piracy. Nobody likes to have their stuff stolen, and App Wrapper, definitely a great product to help fight that issue, because even back then, piracy was a problem, like you said, because people could simply take their physical disc, load it onto another computer, give it to their friends, and then they can clone those discs, and there was no real way of keeping piracy in check, and going the subscription route was the answer to that problem. On top of that, even if people were not giving endless copies to their friends, a lot of times they were just ignoring the license agreement. The license agreement on a box copy of software said you could probably load it on maybe 1 or 2 computers tops, and if they were really nice about it, they'll let you load it onto 3 to 5 computers. I've seen this in certain scenarios, but that license agreement didn't have any real way of policing how many computers you loaded on onto back then, you could load it onto 10 computers and they would have never known because there was no real way of digital rights management back then. Fast forward to today, you have the subscription model. The subscription model makes you create an account. It checks to see how many computers you really are trying to run it on. If you try to install the software on any more than what the license agreement allows, then it'll stop you from installing it right then and there. And your idea, the app wrapper, pretty much paved the way for what we have today. The App Store on Mac, the Google Play Store on Android, the Microsoft Store on Windows. These stores ensure that when you purchase a software program through them, it'll only allow you to run the software programs that you purchase on the number of computers that the license agreement allows. So I would say that App Wrapper was an extremely innovative idea, the best thing since sliced bread. But would you say that it was ahead of its time when you invented it, mainly because box software was such a legion concept that was hotly accepted at the time? I mean, back then the internet was nothing like what it is today. That's why I say it was something that was ahead of its time back in 1993, where there were no smartphones, there was no subscription models for software.
Well, yeah. I mean, standardizing digital rights is a serious issue. And of course, making that agreement reasonable, right? How many computers is reasonable? A very interesting, somewhat iTunes related thing. Also, you remember a lot of big companies in the audio making business, the stereo business, I'm talking about Sony. They understood that the future there would be this convergence of radio and TV and computers. So the idea was you buy music companies, right? You buy movie companies. And Sony had these outstanding engineers who had been building tremendous success with the Walkman. They owned the industry. Now, they kept coming out with digital Walkman, right? Now, music was already digital. It was on compact discs, and there was no digital rights on compact discs. If you could read it digitally, you could make endless copies, blah, blah, blah. Now, the trouble that Sony had internally is the engineers would come to them with an MP3 player, a beautiful small device, gets this many hours, holds that many songs, blah, blah, blah. And the folks from the record company side would say, no, I don't like those digital rights. You need to lock this down more. And the engineers would say, if we lock this down more, people would have to take their compact disc, they would have to install our app, an application storefront, and this encryption application storefront would have to manage transcoding these songs from their unprotected digital state and put them into a protected digital state. That means, you can only do it for so long and so many hours. And every time we come back to the room, you guys want more rules. Eventually, the consumers looked at these things and they said, wow, that's a really small MP3 player. Digital music sounds, great. I've got compact discs and this thing's tiny. It doesn't skip, but I have to go through all these problems to listen to my music. Music I already bought, right? So it's interesting how the business works, right? Sony couldn't make what Apple could, because Apple understood that they could do this in a purely digital way. And for those of your audience who are entrepreneurs, and perhaps those like me who are the engineering background, there were really just two of us at Paget Press. Peggy, who was old enough to be my mom and in some ways kind of was my mom as my business partner, and me, a 20-year-old who had no background in encryption at all. In fact, PGP hadn't been written. There was really nothing suitable in code that you could read that did what we needed it to do. I had to go to a store and buy books about encryption from past wars, because it turns out humans have wanted to encrypt messages for quite a long time. They just didn't have computers. So here I was. If you wanted your software to be sold on the app wrapper, you dialed a phone number that rang a telephone on my desk. That meant every single software developer had spoken to me personally. These were my friends. if I screwed up this encryption, if someone came along and found a way to crack it because I was an idiot and didn't realize something that I needed to do, then not just some of my friends, all of my friends will lose not just some of their software, but their whole business. Everything they've created, all the art, all of their creations are going to be shepherded by my encryption. And I kept thinking to myself, boy, there must be somebody out there at some university who studies this crap, right? They could just come in and write it. Why do I have to do this? And eventually I answered that question in the following way. Sure, it's scary, but Peggy is not going to write the code. You are the technical co-founder. So if this product is going to exist, it must have this DRM, digital rights management. You must write that cryptography because if you do not, no one else will. There may be other people. They're not on your team, okay? It's you or it's Peggy. So since it's not her, it's you. And however much you're afraid, however much it is a lot of work, however much you may hate that, if you're like me and you believe that art is only art when it's on the wall, right? When it's done, when you ship, okay? We don't want to think about things. We want them to exist, and we want them to exist so people use them, right? The Beatles wanted to write songs that people heard. Entrepreneurs, I believe, especially those amongst us like me who consider themselves software inventors, we want to create things people use. And so this drive has to overwhelm your fear. And for me, there came a time where I realized this either doesn't happen or I write the code. So I'm going to have to go and get those books and study and stay up or whatever it takes. But if I don't do it, it won't get done. And that's just leaving it for somebody else to do. And we all know entrepreneurs don't like leaving it to somebody else. If anyone's going to step up to fail, 7 out of every 10 times, let it be me, right? That's the entrepreneur breed.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. We don't like to put things in the hands of other people. We are entrepreneurs because we like having full control over everything. We don't like working for other people as well. And you and me both know that. When I started CDG, I couldn't wait to leave my full-time job because I just didn't like who I was working for. That alone was my motivation, or one of my motivations, I should say, for wanting to start my own business and start this digital marketing company focused on web and graphic design. When I left my full-time job, I knew very well that once I left, I wasn't going to have a source of income, that I would be up the creek without a paddle for a while. But that did not scare me. I wanted to leave my full-time job so badly that I could not wait for my last day to leave and never look back and to start CDG. CDG was a company built on customer service values, very strong ones, where we put the customer first. And many of the places that I used to work at were not like that. And it just felt good to know that I was leaving a job where I was not happy, where my boss didn't truly value me, to start my own business where I could put the customer first. And because that felt so good, and that I knew that I was trying to strive to make a difference in this world, I didn't really allow my fear of not having any regular income coming in consume me. I just wanted to get away from my old job, leave my old boss that I couldn't stand, and start serving customers the way I should have been serving them. Entrepreneurs are very, very resilient people too. We never allow the fears of the future stop us from what we're trying to do. Even when sales numbers don't look good, it doesn't scare me. It doesn't goad me into giving up on my company and going back into the workforce, because I don't want to go back to the workforce. I want to stay running my own company. During COVID, we almost went out of business in 2021. And again, as bad as it looked, it still wasn't enough to push me into going back to full-time work, because fast forward to now, that's no longer an issue. We are seeing moderately well sales numbers in 2024. Now, going beyond your time developing AppWrapper and between starting TruAnon, what were some of your biggest career highlights and how did they contribute to your journey to become an entrepreneur? So we know all about AppWrapper and we all know that you formed TruAnon, but what happened in between those two major events? What led to you becoming an entrepreneur? When did you decide you no longer wanted to work for anybody anybody anymore, like I did, and you just wanted to start your own company, be your own boss, and be the ruler of your own domain.
You make it sound a lot more glamorous than whatever I was doing. I am usually the tech co-founder, but there's plenty of bossing me around from the board to the executives, just to being the one that people blame when things go wrong. So the CTO role is a bit of a janitor hat in my book. But, like I said, one thing that the App Wrapper did was get me connected with everybody in my community. So a lot of people saw my resume or whatever, and they said, oh, I know who this guy is. We should hire him. So, I'm not sure if I always deserve to be on all of these honorable teams with some extremely talented technologies on some of the world's toughest problems. I do remember some other very difficult and interesting startups. We did the very first geo delivery of food, Grubhub. This was also a Steve Jobs related thing, and I come to find out it's been curated in the Smithsonian Institute under Inventions of the 20th Century. Did not even know. But I do recall pitching this startup. And so it was not my job to do the business pitch. I'm, a technical person, so this wasn't me. But imagine the following pitch scenario. Your business people are presenting things, expensive, fancy slides, all of the materials that we've brought, everybody's dressed to the hilt, right? This is a very carefully planned pitch and presentation. The VC investor person is looking very agitated, giving, that sort of sloping on the chair look with the, shoulder out. And finally, he just interrupts and he says, guys, hold it. Let me show you an invention, okay? It's called the telephone, okay? Here's one right on my desk. Look, here's a piece of paper. It says Bill's Pizza, okay? Hello? Bill's Pizza? Send me a pizza, okay? That's all I do. You're asking me, go onto a computer, type all this crap in, and find a pizza place nearby just so that they can deliver me something that I already do using an invention that everybody already has. And you know what? He was right. It was crazy expensive to deliver that first pizza. And just to talk a little bit about the digital transition, there was no Google Maps. There wasn't even Yahoo Maps. There was, for those who are really old, MapQuest, and there was satellite data. We couldn't get data from MapQuest. It didn't come in tiles or anything like that, like Google Maps. We bought about multi-million-dollar a year satellite data. That didn't come with pictures. That was numbers, latitudes and longitudes. To render a map that had roads on it, we had to buy another map service and put the two together. Now, there was no restaurant that could look at a map. So what do? You print them out on giant HP plotters. All night long, these things would be printing poster-size maps that you would fold up into a piece of paper. Again, representing way too much data to send to anybody, and they don't have a computer with a monitor that can even display it. They take this piece of paper out, they put it on the table, and they mark off the areas that they're willing to deliver, right? Now, each of these grid squares has numbers, as we know, they're lat-long coordinates. So as they draw their circle around their business and define where they won't deliver, they mail this back to us. A couple of weeks later, we receive this thing that took $200 of printing and, had to be sent in the mail. We receive it back. What happens? We have people in pools of data entry, a word that we don't even use much in computers anymore. But this job was opening up these envelopes out of the mail, looking at these maps, and typing in each of these latitude and longitude numbers for every square that they all delivered to. Needless to say, the technology was not fully there yet, and many of the things that were there, like, why couldn't you use email? Why can't you send a link to a map? Email couldn't take those kinds of document sizes. There were no online maps that you could link to like that. People had never put their restaurant in any online listing. Each restaurant had to be called. They don't have a computer. So how do you do it? You explain to the person over the phone, they enter it for you, You send them a piece of paper in the mail, they can correct if they see any problems. This is impossible. We look back at the world like that today, and it is laughable how difficult that was. Yet we also recognize that's where Seamless comes from. That's where Grubhub comes from. That code itself evolved from Cyber Slice into Cyber Meals, into Food.com, and later into what I believe is Grubhub. And there, who knows, maybe there's some legacy code left over, literally from that very first startup. But it all depends on when you ask about success. Because is that successful? Well, no. A CyberSlice lost incredible amounts of money. Oh, but we sold. Okay, but Cyber Meals subsequently lost even more money. Oh, well, that sold. It's like, well, okay, Food.com did rather well. And by the time you get to Grubhub, you're like, well, this is a big industry, and this is a big app, and this was a good investment, right? But where along the line did you say this is successful? And where along that line would you have equally said this is a failure? So that's why I think the story about baseball greats who step up to the plate to fail 7 out of 10 times is so apropos for us entrepreneurs, especially those who are tech entrepreneurs trying to create and shepherd inventions to market. It's just that risky and crazy. But the fact is that if you don't do it, nothing happened. And if you do it, hey, it's not going to work out the way you thought anyway.
Why, yes, that's very true. Entrepreneurship is a game of trial and error. You'll never know if your idea is going to succeed or if it's going to fail. Products like Grubhub were extremely innovative. At the time, people probably didn't see its potential, and restaurant owners probably didn't see its potential, but it caught on very fast. And before platforms such as Grubhub and its competitors entered the fray, really the only restaurants that were doing delivery were pizza and Chinese restaurants. And not only did platforms revolutionize the delivery industry for food service, but stores also caught on to this as well. Now you can do all your grocery shopping from your phone or from your computer, and you don't have to drive down the street to Kroger, deal with long lines, and all the inconveniences of going to the grocery store. You can just simply do all your shopping on your phone and they deliver it to your door. Just about every restaurant now delivers. Every restaurant you can think of pretty much delivers, whether it's your mom and pop shops or your chain restaurants. They all deliver thanks to Grubhub. They offer delivery service to a third-party driver that works for Grubhub or Uber Eats or DoorDash. Delivery has always been such a big deal for the pizza delivery industry. Domino's tried to be unique way back in the day by offering delivery in 30 minutes or less, or your order was free, and eventually they had to get rid of that policy because many of their drivers were getting into car accidents trying to deliver within that time window. Because think about it, within that 30-minute time window, the 30 minutes starts the moment they hung up the phone with the customer all the way till the pizza arrived at the door. So within that 30-minute window, they had to make the pizza, make sure it was correct, and then get it out on the road. And you can see how that could become quite chaotic at the time. But, delivery in general has always been a major player in the pizza world. And then thanks to innovative products like Grubhub, we've seen delivery expand to every restaurant you can think of. Every restaurant, the chains, the mom and pops, the ones that normally didn't engage in delivery. It was a major shakeup in the food delivery world. And the fact that it's also spread to the retail world really shows what an impact it has had overall in the industry. Consumers are happier. They're glad that they're able to simply make purchases from the comforts of their own home without having to deal with traffic at the malls if they're going shopping. I mean, nobody likes dealing with that. Let's be honest. Even I don't like dealing with that, especially during the holidays. And then when COVID hit, we saw major changes to this as well. More people were doing this than ever because physical stores were closed in the name of public safety. It was proven even more now that people could pretty much order whatever they wanted, whether it's food or clothes or supplies for the home. It didn't really require much. They just pull out their phone, pull out their computer, they go to the retailer of their choice, place their order, and then within a matter of minutes, I would say maybe 30 minutes or so, depending on how far away they live from the store, all their purchases would arrive at their doorstep. I mean, isn't that something? That truly did change the world of commerce in general. E-commerce has become a bigger thing than ever now. And then my final question for you is, aside from everything that you've shared with us today, what is the biggest piece of advice that you could share for our listeners, whether they be aspiring entrepreneurs, experienced business owners, or career-focused individuals, when it comes to following your dreams and never being afraid of failure?
Well, that's a tall order, which I will attempt, but I also want to just comment about your observations there. Yeah, we get so much more when we bring our lives online, right? And COVID, however unfortunate, really forced businesses, right, to handle much more remote work, give people more of what they wanted out of their work experiences. And it changed the relationship. Of course, people work all the time too, right? But I can take my kids to the doctor. So we get so many more options. We get more services. We get more convenience. But you know what? We get less of something too. In fact, we get less of only one thing, and we get a lot less of it. Trust, right? We get less trust. When I see you in person or you walk into my bank, you can't be 500 different people, right? You can't just bum rush us. You hold out a piece of identity and it's probably yours, right? You probably live in the neighborhood. We've probably seen you around, right? It's a whole different thing when your business has a door online. You cannot trust what's going on, and people view that door as, a vehicle for crime. So to answer your tall order question, I'm not sure that my individual life journey is one that we can model in all of those different ways. But I will tell you this, between app stores and the Smithsonian and transitioning digital and physical into purely digital solutions, that's been, my life. And sometimes I step up to that plate and 7 out of every 10 times these things don't work, right? But every now and again, if you play, you maybe can hit one over the fence. And so I think the thing that I've learned in my gray hair years, looking back at my own career, is whether or not demoing to Steve Jobs was courageous or not, it was the drive to know if I didn't do it, it might not be done. Or like we were saying, Christian, even worse, somebody else might make them. If anyone is going to make the mistakes here, then it'd best be me. So I don't know the answer to your questions, but I'll tell you, success seems to depend a lot on when you ask and what it is that you're asking. That demo to Steve Jobs is a failure story, right? That wasn't the success we wanted for our startup. We wanted to be the app store for everybody. Now, 15 or 20 years later, a Steve Jobs story that I thought wasn't all that interesting, for a failure that I wasn't particularly interested in telling people about. Suddenly with the iPhone, people begin to ask, hey, app stores are pretty darn useful things. And, isn't that amazing that you invented that? And it is an irony to me to realize that today, this is my calling card, right? Everybody wants to know that story. Well, it's fine and it makes a pretty good story, but let's face it, it's not a success story, at least not then. So I urge your entrepreneur friends and listeners to remember that maybe fearlessness is not something that I or my experiences can teach you, because I had a lot of fear. But maybe the balance or the drive to put that art on the wall can help you work through those days where the failure just seems all around you. There was never a time pitching any of those things that we just talked about that anybody walked out and said, boy, these guys are really smart. I think they're really going to make something, We were made fun of, not by a few people, universally, okay? And in retrospect, that probably told me these were revolutionary ideas. Revolutionary ideas require that there is a period of time where everybody tells you you have completely failed. It's just the way it is. So I'll admit that I don't have all the answers to your question, but I will also point out a nice thing that I'm willing to do here, a spontaneous act of generosity for your listeners. I know some of you are out there using social media. Maybe you're on LinkedIn. Maybe you're on Discord or Reddit. Maybe you're using dating sites. God help you if you're still using Craigslist, but some of you probably are. Some of you may even be product managers. safety people, owners and operators of these dating sites and peer marketplaces. If you come to TruAnon and you want to help transition to a world that is privatized and secure it for future generations, come to our Get page on TruAnon.com and just take any slot that you see with a demo advisor. Mention this podcast and I will personally pick up that call. And there's a few things that we can offer if you're a startup or are a small or medium-sized business that, may help you put some hard-earned dollars more towards marketing and less towards verifying. So come to TruAnon, and I'm always willing to talk shop. If you're an entrepreneur and you got questions, go ahead. Be glad to take your call. All right.
And there will be a link to TruAnon in the description. Wherever you're listening to this podcast at, the link's going to be in the description for you to go check out their website. And I encourage you to partake of this offer that Jesse is giving you right now, because identity theft is still a major problem, and his product is the answer to making sure that nobody ever impersonates you online anywhere.
True that. Lock down your digital identity. Help make the world a safer place. Let's save some whales.
And that's exactly what you're doing with TruAnon. It truly is a product that is making the world a better place, a safer place, because like I mentioned earlier, scams are a major problem. Identity theft is a major problem. I've talked to many people over the years who have been a victim of identity theft in some form. And of course, I've also talked to people who have dealt with scammers in general, and it truly is a nightmarish experience, but it doesn't have to be that way. You have the solution to your online identity theft right here, and Jesse is the king when it comes to this concept. I thank you very much for coming on our show today. Before we go, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners that we have not covered or that you'd like to say?
No, I think we've covered a lot of exciting and interesting ground. You brought up a few stories that I haven't recalled in a long time, so hopefully people found this a little bit interesting, perhaps a little amusing, and hopefully helps you in your journey.
I personally found all of your commentary and stories extremely amusing, and I will certainly be having you back on for future episodes. I thank you once again, Jesse. Your wisdom, your expertise and knowledge, our listeners are going to find it very beneficial, and I'm hoping that everybody out there who is listening will take all of your advice to heart and remember that there's always going to be failures out there, but you should never be afraid to fail, and you should never let your failures stop you from achieving your goals and reaching your dreams.
Here's to the crazy ones.
Yes, here's to the crazy ones. Thanks, Jesse. You have a great day now. Thank you once again for coming on BizCast, and we look forward to having you on future episodes.
Thank you, sir.